After the roundup, the ghetto changed. It wasn't just quieter, it was hollow. Entire streets felt abandoned, as if the buildings themselves were holding memories they didn't want to release. Windows stood open in the winter wind, curtains drifting like ghosts. Doorways that once overflowed with people now led only to empty rooms, filled with scattered belongings and hurried footprints. Hope had moved out before anyone else. Samuel survived by following a simple rule: stay unseen, stay silent, stay small. He slept inside the piano on most nights, not because it was warm, but because it was the last place in the world where he felt protected. The wood now carried the smell of cold nights, stale air, and the faint traces of his father's hands. Every time he climbed inside, he whispered a thank you to the piano, to fate, to anything listening. But Samuel wasn't the only child left behind. Sometimes, in the stillness of morning, he heard soft tapping on the wall from the apartment next door. At first, he thought it was just pipes or wind. Then, one day, he answered with a gentle tap of his own. A few moments later, 2 taps returned. They weren't words, just proof that someone else was still alive. That someone was Miriam. They met only once, face to face, in the stairwell, on a day when the frost had softened enough for her to search for food. She didn't smile, but her eyes brightened at the sight of another child. They exchanged only a handful of whispered sentences, but in a place where trust was almost impossible. The simple knowledge that another heartbeat existed nearby gave Samuel a strength he didn't know he still had. Then, rumors spread quietly. New lists, new registrations, new orders. People said the ghetto was going to be reorganized, though everyone understood that word meant something far different than it sounded. Some residents packed small bundles in preparation. Others boarded up windows. As if wood could change reality, the tension grew so thick that even the cold seemed to hesitate before entering the room. One morning, before the sun was up, Samuel heard distant engines. Not the usual patrols, these were heavier, coordinated. Voices echoed through the streets, firm and commanding. Doors opened, footsteps moved quickly, and the fragile calm of the previous days shattered. The entire district had awakened to the same truth. Something large was happening. Samuel climbed into the piano without waiting for a signal. His hands trembled as he lowered the lid, leaving only a familiar thin line of light. Through it, he saw shadows crossing his apartment. Papers were lifted. Furniture scraped the floor. Every sound seemed magnified in the confined space, but there were no shouts, no chaos, only methodical searching, movements shaped by routine rather than rage. Somehow, that made it more unnerving. Minutes stretched into hours. When the building finally fell silent, it wasn't the comforting kind. It was the type that follows a place emptied of its people. A silence that understands more than it should. Samuel pushed the lid open carefully. The apartment looked untouched, yet completely changed. The air felt heavier. Dust floated in the light, drifting slowly as if time itself had grown tired. He checked the stairwell. No voices, no neighbors, no sign of anyone returning soon. Miriam's tapping never came again. The absence hurt more than fear ever had. Samuel wandered through nearby rooms, hoping to find a familiar face or some trace of life, but the ghetto had become a museum of hurried departures. Coats left on hooks, half-boiled water in pots, shoes lined up neatly by doors, waiting for owners who had not chosen to leave them behind. He returned to the piano, sitting beside it, colder than the winter outside. The instrument had saved him more times than he could count, but he now understood a truth he had been avoiding. The hiding place had turned into a prison. If he stayed, he would vanish, like everyone else. That night, as wind pressed against the window and loose boards creaked under the weight of snow, Samuel made the decision that changed everything. He would not wait for another list or another morning filled with engines. He would escape the ghetto not because he was brave, but because staying was no longer survival. He collected the few items he had: a scarf, a cracked cup, a crust of bread, and a small wooden button his mother once sewed onto his coat. He placed his hand on the piano for a long moment, feeling its familiar texture, its quiet strength. Then, with a deep breath that tasted of fear and frost, he stepped into the hallway. Tomorrow, he would reach the wall, Tomorrow, he would climb. Tomorrow, he would try, because sometimes survival wasn't about hiding. Sometimes it was about moving forward when everything behind you had been erased. The ghetto swallowed sound. That was the first thing Samuel noticed. No matter how many people pushed through the narrow alleys, no matter how many carts rolled over broken stones, everything felt strangely muted, as if the streets themselves were holding their breath. The walls were too close, the windows too small, the air too heavy. Even laughter seemed like something guilty, something whispered. Samuel clung to his mother's coat as they walked past crowds of families dragging whatever fragments of their old lives they could carry. Everyone looked tired. Everyone looked older. Their new apartment was a single room above a butcher's stall, the smell of raw meat rising through the floorboards. There was barely space for the three of them, but somehow the piano fit, wedged between the wall and the window like a hulking, stubborn survivor. Neighbors mocked his father for bringing it. "You can't eat music!" they sneered. "You can't bribe a guard with a piano." His father ignored them, simply polishing the wood as if preparing for a concert no one would ever hear. Life in the ghetto was a steady tightening of ropes. One day, Jews were forbidden to leave before sunrise. Then after sunset, then without papers. Food rations shrank to crumbs. Disease spread faster than news. Samuel S.'s mother traded her last silver earrings for a loaf of bread so small it fit in her hand. People whispered about deportation's entire families disappearing after nighttime knocks on their doors. But through it all, the piano stayed. Some nights, Samuel heard his parents arguing in low, desperate voices. His mother said the piano had to go. It took up space they needed, space worth money they didn't have. His father refused. "You don't understand," he whispered hoarsely. "This instrument is not here to be played. It's here because one day it will be the only place he can survive." Samuel pretended not to hear, but he understood. The first time soldiers stormed their building, the warning came too late. Boots thundered up the stairs. Someone screamed 2 floors below. His father grabbed Samuel by the shoulders. Inside, he ordered. Samuel obeyed, without a word. He climbed into the piano's hollow belly, curled tight as a fist, and his father lowered the lid until only a sliver of light remained. Darkness pressed around him. He could feel his own pulse echoing against the wood. Then came the knocking loud, violent, final. "Open the door." His mother's voice trembled as she shouted back, "One moment!" The door burst open. Samuel heard everything. The soldiers rifling through their belongings, the clatter of plates, the guttural laughter when they found nothing worth stealing. His mother stood silent, trying not to breathe too loudly. His father answered every question with a yes. "Sir," or "No, sir," his voice thin as string. And all the while, Samuel didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't exist. At one point, a soldier walked so close he bumped the piano. The vibration traveled through the strings like a whisper of danger. Samuel squeezed his eyes shut, imagining the lid flying open, imagining hands yanking him out. But the soldier only cursed and moved on. Minutes passed like hours. Then, as suddenly as they had come, the soldiers left. The silence that followed was painful. His father lifted the lid slowly. "You did well," he whispered. "You stayed quiet." But in his eyes, Samuel saw terror, not just from what had happened, but from what he knew would happen again. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He sat beside the piano, touching its side gently. His father joined him. "Do you know why I chose this piano?" he asked softly. Samuel shook his head. "Because sound hides sound," his father said. "A house can be searched, a bed overturned. But no soldier thinks to look inside an instrument that makes noise. They see wood and strings. They don't see a child." Samuel leaned his head against the piano's side. "But what if they hear me breathe?" he whispered. "Then you must learn not to." It wasn't said cruelly. It was said with the sorrow of a man who had run out of gentle truths. In the days that followed, the piano became a routine. Every time boots echoed in the street, every time a whistle blew, Samuel would slip inside. His body learned the shape. His breath learned the rhythm. The piano had learned his heartbeat. Outside, the ghetto continued to shrink. Streets closed. People vanished. Inside the piano, Samuel Watted safe for now, but only in the way drowning feels safe before you reach the bottom. He didn't know it yet, but the worst was still coming: the roundups, the deportations, the moment when the piano would no longer be just a hiding place, but the thin line between life and the fate waiting beyond the barbed wire. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it and subscribing for more content that matters. Winter arrived like a sentence. The cold crept into the ghetto through cracked windows and thin walls, settling into bones that no longer had enough food to warm them. Samuel's breath came out in ghosts as he huddled near the piano, the wood icy under his fingertips. The streets outside turned quiet, not peaceful, but empty, drained, watched. Those who still dared venture out moved fast, eyes lowered, as if the sky itself were dangerous. The roundups had begun. At first, they happened sporadically: a building here, a street there. Soldiers would storm in before dawn, drag families out into the snow, shout names from crumpled lists that never seemed to end. But soon it became systematic, organized, efficient. People started sleeping in their clothes. Suitcases waited by doors. Mothers braided their daughters' hair, at night, not out of care, but out of fear, knowing they might not wake up at home. Samuel's mother grew paler by the day. She barely spoke. She spent hours staring at the window as if trying to memorize the shape of the ghetto in case she never saw it again. His father, once a man who could fix anything, now walked like someone who had long since stopped believing in tools. But he still polished the piano, rubbing the wood with the last bit of oil they owned, as if shining it enough could somehow protect the boy who slept inside it. Then came the decree. Every resident must report 2 registration stations. Rumors spread like fire. Some said it was for labor assignments. Others said transports were being prepared. Nobody knew which version was true. Everybody feared both. On the night before their assigned registration, Samuel woke to whispers, sharp, urgent, terrified. His parents were arguing in hushed, breaking voices. "We can't report," his mother said. "Everyone who goes disappears. If we don't go, they take us anyway," his father replied. "But if Samuel is hidden, maybe?" She hissed. "Maybe is all we have left." Their fear filled the room like smoke. By morning, the streets pulsed with panic. Lines formed outside the registration office, thin figures wrapped in layers of rags, shivering more from dread than cold. Families clutched each other, as if holding tighter could keep fate from loosening their grip. Samuel's parents stood in line with the rest, but his father kept glancing back, eyes flicking toward the apartment, toward the piano hidden inside. When soldiers began separating the crowdmen to one side, women and children to another, Samuel felt his father's hand tremble around his. That had never happened before. A whistle blew orders barged. Chaos erupted. Women pleaded, men protested, children cried. Soldiers pushed with rifle butts. Papers flew into the wind like desperate birds. And in the confusion, Samuel's father crouched, grabbed his son's face between his cold hands, and whispered the words that would follow the boy for the rest of his life: "Run home. Hide inside the piano. Do not come out, no matter what you hear." Samuel froze. His mother's eyes flashed with terror. "He's just a child." "That is exactly why he must hide," his father replied, voice cracked and raw. He kissed her cheek. Once quick Fenelon shoved Samuel toward the alley. Samuel didn't look back. He couldn't. He slipped through the panicked crowd, dodging adults who didn't even notice him. Bullets cracked in the distance. Dogs barked. Someone screamed his mother's name, but Samuel ran, legs shaking, breath sharp in the cold air. By the time he reached the apartment, tears were freezing on his cheeks. Inside, the room felt hollow, as if it already knew what was coming. He climbed into the piano, pulled the lid down softly, buried his face in the darkness. Outside, boots thundered. Shouts rose. Doors slammed open along the street. Samuel held his breath until his chest ached. Then he heard it. His mother's voice, not terrified this time, not pleading, just calling for him. Calling with a note of hope she didn't know was impossible. Samuel, he needed to answer, but he remembered his father's command. So he stayed silent, trembling, tears running into his collar. Moments later, boots entered the room. Voices barked orders. Furniture scraped, drawers opened. His mother cried out, once sharp, choked hand. Then the sound was swallowed by marching, by doors, by distance. And then nothing. Only the piano's wooden ribs around him, shaking with each heartbeat. Hours passed like years. When he finally opened the lid, the room was overturned again, colder than before. The air smelled of sweat, gun oil, and absence. The ghetto had taken his parents, and the piano had kept him. But safety in the ghetto was temporary. False, fleeting, because by the end of that winter, the transports would come for everyone, piano or no piano, and Samuel's time was running out. After the roundup, the ghetto changed. It wasn't just quiet, it was hollow. Streets that once buzzed with life now felt abandoned, as if the buildings themselves were holding on to memories. I saw windows left open to the winter wind, with curtains drifting like ghosts. Doorways that used to overflow with people now led only to empty rooms, filled with scattered belongings and hurried footprints. Hope, it seemed, had moved out before anyone else. I survived by following a simple rule: stay unseen, stay silent, stay small. Most nights, I slept inside an old piano. It wasn't warm, but it was the last place in the world where I felt protected. The wood held the scent of cold nights, stale air, and the faint memory of my father's hands. Every time I climbed inside, I would whisper a thank you to the piano, to fate, to anything that might be listening. But I wasn't the only child left behind. Sometimes, in the stillness of the morning, I'd hear a soft tapping on the wall from the apartment next door. At first, I thought it was just the pipes or the wind. Then, one day, I answered with a gentle tap of my own. A few moments later, 2 taps returned. They weren't words, but they were proof that someone else was still alive. Her name was Miriam. We only met face to face once, in the stairwell. She didn't smile, but her eyes brightened at the sight of another child. We exchanged just a handful of whispered sentences. In a place where trust was nearly impossible, just knowing another heartbeat was nearby gave me a strength I didn't know I still had. Then, the rumors started spreading again. New lists, new registrations. People said the ghetto was going to be reorganized. We all knew what that word really meant. The tension grew so thick, you could feel it in the air. One morning, before sunrise, I heard distant engines. They were heavier, more coordinated than the usual patrols. Voices echoed through the streets, firm and commanding. Doors opened, footsteps hurried, and the fragile calm of the past few days shattered completely. The entire district woke up to the same truth. Something big was happening. I climbed into the piano without a second thought. My hands trembled as I lowered the lid, leaving only a thin line of light. Through that crack, I watched shadows cross my apartment. Papers were lifted, furniture scraped the floor. The searching was methodical, routine, which somehow made it even more unnerving. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. When the building finally fell silent, it wasn't a comforting quiet. It was the silence that follows a place emptied of its people. I pushed the lid open. The apartment looked untouched, yet it felt completely changed. The air was heavier. I checked the stairwell, no voices. No neighbors, no one. Miriam's tapping never came again. The absence of that sound hurt more than fear ever had. I wandered through nearby rooms, but the ghetto had become a museum of hurried departures. Coats on hooks, half-boiled water in pots, shoes lined up by doors, waiting for owners who would never return. I went back to the piano and sat beside it, colder than the winter air outside. It had saved me so many times, but I finally understood a truth I had been avoiding. My hiding place had become a prison. If I stayed, I would simply vanish like everyone else. That night, as the wind pressed against the window, I made a decision. I would not wait for another list, another roundup. I would escape the ghetto, not because I was brave, but because staying was no longer an option for survival. I gathered the few things I had: a scarf, a cracked cup, a crust of bread, and a small wooden button my mother had sewn onto my coat. I placed my hand on the piano one last time, feeling its quiet strength. Then, with a deep breath that tasted of fear and frost, I stepped into the hallway. Tomorrow, I would reach the wall. Tomorrow, I would climb. Tomorrow, I would try. Because sometimes, survival isn't about hiding. It's about moving forward when everything behind you has been erased. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing for more content like this. The night Samuel chose to escape was colder than any he remembered. The sky hung low and heavy, as if the clouds themselves wanted to press the ghetto deeper into the earth. Snow muffled every sound, turning footsteps into shadows. This silence, usually threatening, was a gift tonight. It meant he could move. He approached the outer wall with cautious steps, staying close to broken fences and abandoned carts for cover. The wall seemed even larger now that he stood beneath it. The barbed wire curled like a crown of frost, reflecting faint moonlight in metallic glints. Beyond it lay a darkness that wasn't shaped by curfews or orders. It was the open world, unpredictable but free. Samuel waited behind the remains of a crate, watching the rhythm of the patrols. The guards walked in steady patterns, their lanterns casting narrow cones of light across the snow. He counted the spaces between their passes, memorizing moments where the yard dipped into complete shadow. He didn't know how long he'd been studying their movements. Time had stopped feeling linear weeks ago. But eventually, the pattern made sense. There was a window small, but real. The sewer grate had always been part rumor, part myth. People spoke of tunnels under the ghetto, but rarely with confidence. Samuel found the grate near the furthest corner of the wall, half covered by ice. His fingers ached as he tried to lift it. The metal barely budged. He pressed his ear to the ground, listening. No boots, no dogs, no shouts. Gathering what little strength he had, he lifted again. This time the grate shifted. Tenless cold air rose from below, damp and still. He lowered himself into the darkness. The tunnel was narrow, forcing him to crawl on hands and knees. Water pooled in shallow dips, soaking through his sleeves. Every sound echoed the slide of his palms, the drip of condensation, the rasp of his breath. The air smelled of earth and distance. Samuel moved slowly, pausing every few meters to listen for danger above. The tunnel twisted more than he expected. At one intersection, the passage split in two. Cold instinct told him to follow the upward slope. He crawled toward the faintest suggestion of air, something crisp, something that didn't belong to the ghetto. A thin trace of moonlight leaked through the end of the tunnel. He reached a wooden board, blocking the exit. Pushing gently did nothing. He pressed harder, nothing. So he braced his feet against the stone and pushed with every ounce of strength left in his arms. The board shifted, letting in a sliver of fresh air. Another push, stronger this time, and the board lifted enough for Samuel to squeeze through. He emerged into a shallow ditch just beyond the ghetto wall. The cold outside was different, sharper, thinner, freer. Samuel crouched low, letting his eyes adjust. Behind him, the wall loomed like a giant he had finally outrun. In front of him stretched a forest, branches bare and black against the sky. It looked endless. It looked unforgiving, but unlike the ghetto, it didn't try to contain him. He moved along the ditch until he felt far enough from the wall not to be seen. Then he climbed out, boots sinking into deep snow. For a moment, he simply stood there, breathing the unfamiliar air. There were no commands, no engines, no footsteps closing in. Just wind moving through trees. Samuel began to walk. Each step felt uncertain, but real. The forest swallowed him with quiet acceptance. Snow broke softly under his feet. The wind carried scents he barely remembered: pine, wet earth, distant smoke that didn't smell like burning buildings. Stars shone between branches, dim and scattered, but present. He didn't know where he was going, only where he could not return. After unaware, he collapsed beside a fallen log, exhaustion settling into every muscle. He huddled there, wrapping his coat tightly around himself. The stillness was intimidating, yet strangely comforting. For the first time in months, he could hear his own heartbeat without fear guiding its rhythm. He allowed himself to rest only, briefly. Morning would reveal footprints. Patrols might search the perimeter. He had to keep moving. But before he rose again, he whispered into the quiet, "I'm still here." Not a declaration, not a victory, a promise. He stood, brushed snow from his sleeves, and stepped deeper into the forest. Each step forward felt like rewriting a page that fear had tried to erase. Behind him, the ghetto remained confined to its walls. Ahead of him, the world stretched open, vast and uncertain. And Samuel walked toward it not with confidence, but with resolve. Sometimes survival wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to move anyway.